Chapter 1. The Man Who Knocked in the Rain. That night, he came back after 12 years drenched, broke, and begging for a second chance. But when my 17-year-old son searched his name, what we found wasn't redemption. It was fraud-forged signatures, and a man who once left us now trying to steal our future. I'm Laura Merritt, and this is how the man who knocked in the rain learned that forgiveness has limits. Rain pressed against the windows like a steady hand, not violent, just insistent, a February rhythm that belonged to Seattle more than any of us ever could. I was reconciling a small business account at the kitchen table when I heard the knock. It was the kind of sound that suggests a delivery practical and neutral. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to the door. He stood there damp and hollow-eyed with a careful smile that looked practiced. Daniel Hale, the man who left when our son was a little boy and I was a new mother with a mortgage I had not expected to carry alone. Water slid from the edge of his jacket and pooled on the doormat. He said he had been through hell and he wanted to make things right. He did not use those exact words, not that I remember, but that was the shape of it. His voice had that delicate gentleness people try on when they want you to believe you are safe with them. I stepped aside because I did not want a scene on the porch in front of the neighbor across the hall who never misses anything. The apartment smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner and the faint damp of wool. Daniel took 2 steps in and stopped as if waiting for permission to continue. I gave him a folded towel for his hair and pointed to the rug by the radiator for his shoes. That was when I noticed them. Not cheap. Italian leather with a signature sole I had seen in a magazine ad once. They did not match the word broke. They did match the word performance. Evan stood in the hallway just beyond the living room. 17 now. Taller than me by 2 inches, all legs and shoulders, and the kind of quiet that comes from learning early that silence can keep you safe. He watched without moving. I could feel the questions forming in his breath. I said I would handle it and gave him the look that means, I mean it. He drifted back toward his room like a tide pulling away from the shore, slow and inevitable. Daniel told a story that meandered. He had tried to start over after the divorce. He had taken on partners who turned out to be the wrong kind of ambitious. There had been lawsuits that were unfair. There had been a judgment that would be reversed any day now. He was rebuilding. He wanted to be a better man. He said he knew I had every right to close the door, but could I please let him catch his breath and see his son? The words were old currency. I kept listening anyway, not because I believed him, because I wanted the facts people reveal when they think they are already safe. The radiator hissed softly. The rain kept its even pace. I took his jacket and laid it over the back of a chair. His shirt clung to his shoulders, and I could see the outline of muscle that had softened with time. His hair had gone gray at the temples. He still smelled like cedar cologne and something sharper underneath that I could not name. Guilt is too abstract to have a scent. Maybe it was the metal edge of adrenaline. He asked how I had been. I said fine. He asked about work. I said I had taken on more freelance accounting clients, and it was steady. He asked about Evan, what he liked, where he wanted to go to college. I told him Evan was good at math and code and that he had been looking at engineering programs. I did not say which ones. He nodded like a man listening to bad news that he could spin into inspiration. He glanced around the room and I watched him take inventory. The budget couch that looks nicer than it is. The framed photo of Evan at age 9 with a soccer trophy. The bookshelf with the tax manuals and the 2 novels I keep meaning to finish. He asked if he could sit. I told him to take the chair near the heater so he would dry off faster. He sat, folded the towel neatly beside him, and rubbed his hands together as if he could make warmth out of friction. There was a time when the sight of him would have thrown me off the edge of my composure. Newborn months, diapers and bottles and bills, the hollow at 3 a.m. when the house is so quiet you can hear the refrigerator motor and your own blood. Back then, I would have given anything to hear his key in the lock. Now I wanted to know why his shoes were expensive while his story was threadbare. He said he was staying with a friend in Georgetown. He said it was temporary. He said he wanted to find a way to be around without making it hard. This city is full of people who say temporary and mean until the next opportunity to take more than they return. I said he could stay on the sofa for one night. He looked relieved in a way that made me think he had a list of people who had said no. I added a rule. No keys, no guests, no requests. He nodded with gratitude so sincere it felt almost theatrical. Evan reappeared in the doorway, hands in his pockets. Daniel stood, He started toward him and then stopped. He tried a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. He said he had missed a lot and he wanted to be around if that was all right. Evan did not answer right away. He looked at Daniel the way boys look at a coach who promises playing time without checking the roster. Evan said he had homework. It was not unkind. It was a line. He went back to his room, Daniel deflated by a fraction. He pretended not to. I got a mug and poured coffee and handed it to him and watched his hands. No shaking, no tell. He sipped and made a face and then said it was perfect. Compliment as reflex. I thought of all the times I had confused politeness for intention. He asked if he could take a shower. I said yes. He took a long time. Water ran like a river. When he came back, his hair was combed and the tired look had lifted a little. The towel was draped straight on the bar as if we were in a hotel. The bathroom smelled like my soap. Small trespasses always announced themselves politely. I heated soup and sliced bread, and we ate in a quiet that was almost companionable if you did not think about the past. He told me he had a line on a project in Portland. He said he just needed to get his credit situation stabilized. He said a lot of things that had the shape of need but not the admission of it. I did not ask about Whitmore developments. I did not ask about the judgment I had seen scroll past a local business feed last fall. Some truths ask to be heard from the person who owes them. Once the dishes were done, I made up the sofa with clean sheets and an extra blanket and set a glass of water on the end table. He thanked me 3 times in 3 different tones. He said he would be out of my hair in the morning. He said he would look for a room, maybe a short-term sublet, something simple. He said he wanted to show me he could be responsible. A man who wants something always promises the future, like a gift he already wrapped. He fell asleep almost instantly, mouth slightly open, hand on his chest. The lines at his forehead smoothed out, and he looked younger and almost gentle. Exhaustion wears the same face as innocence when the light is low. I stood there longer than I needed to, and then turned off the lamp and left him to his dreams. In the hallway, the old floor creaked under my feet. I paused outside Evan's door and heard the soft clack of keys. He was at his desk, with the laptop open, shoulders hunched the way he sits when he is concentrating. He did not look up. I leaned against the door frame and waited. He knew I was there. He always does. After a few seconds, he said he was finishing a problem set. I said good and asked if he wanted tea. He said he was fine. None of us used the word father. It seemed impolite to say it out loud when the person in question was asleep in the next room like a complicated stray. I went back to the kitchen and wiped the counters until they shone. I put my ledger away but left the pen on top as if I might return to it. I checked the locks. Twice. It is a habit I do not apologize for anymore. Then I sat at the table and let the rain talk to the glass while the radiator ticked. When you have carried yourself through enough nights, you learn to measure quiet in useful units. This is how much stillness I need in order to sleep. This is how much I can spare to someone who once used up everything without asking. The apartment settled around me. Somewhere a siren moved along the street and faded. I thought of the last time I had seen Daniel, not counting the courthouse on the day our divorce was finalized. The thin anger in his jaw when he signed the final draft. The way he had turned to leave without looking back. I remembered holding Evan on my hip at the sink and deciding that we were going to be the kind of house that kept the lights paid and the fridge full and the noise down. We did that. We did it all the way to this night. I must have drifted because when I opened my eyes, the clock on the stove said a little past 11. The apartment had that middle-of-the-night feeling, even though it was not. I got up and walked softly down the hall. Evan's door was still open a few inches. He was still at the desk, but the posture was different, less hunched, more resolved. The screen cast a pale rectangle on his face. I could see the tab labels along the top row, a search bar with our last name and his. The page he had open showed a headline in bold. Former Whitmore Developments chief loses fraud case and is ordered to repay investors. There were lines about asset seizures and a timeline that ran from the same year we married to the year everything fell apart. A list of names, and one of them was his. Not surprising. Still seeing it in print is different from hearing it in a story told by a tired man on your sofa. Evan scrolled slowly. He read with that steady attention he has when he is testing a circuit diagram or picking apart a math proof. He clicked through to a second article from a business journal, and then a third from a local station. He did not take notes. He did not shake his head or sigh. He did not say I knew it. He simply gathered the facts and placed them in the quiet center of himself where he keeps the things he trusts. I stayed where I was, just a shadow in the hall. He closed the browser, then the laptop. He sat back and let out a breath I could not hear, but I could see it leave him. His eyes shifted toward the living room, toward the rectangle of darkness where the sofa waited with a sleeping man on it. The expression on his face was not anger and not grief, it was recognition. He understood in a way I had not given him credit for that this visit was not about love. It was about shelter and a signature and a story meant to be persuasive. He reached for the chain on the desk lamp and paused. His hand hovered for a second, and then he left the light on and stood and stretched the way athletes do after a long run. When he turned toward the door, he noticed me. He did not startle. He just met my eyes and held them. Something passed between us that did not need words. I nodded almost nothing and stepped back. He lifted his chin in a small answer and closed his door with a softness that spoke of a boy who grew up learning how to keep the peace in small apartments. I went to the living room and looked at Daniel again. The rain had eased. The city sounded like a drum in a far room. I adjusted the edge of the blanket that had slipped from his shoulder and then stopped my hand in midair and set it back at my side. Caretaking is a muscle that learns its own restraint. Back in the kitchen, I turned off the overhead light and left the one over the stove. It throws a mild glow that makes the room look honest. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter and counted the breaths until my shoulders lowered from my ears. Tomorrow would bring its set of negotiations. I would have to say no without using anger as a weapon. I would have to keep the boundaries clean and the explanations brief. I could do that. I have done harder. I checked the locks one more time and then went to my room and let the dark lift me. Somewhere in the middle distance, a ferry horn sounded low across the water. Seattle holding its own slow conversation with itself. I lay there and listened until the last edges of the day fell away. The man who knocked in the rain slept in my living room. My son slept down the hall with facts arranged like stones in a straight line. I was in my bed with my eyes open and then finally closed. There would be breakfast, there would be choices, there would be the kind of truth that arrives without fanfare. For now, the apartment held and the night did what nights do. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Gift and the Lie. Morning came with a pale strip of light along the blinds and the soft sound of water in the pipes. I lay there for a moment and let my body take inventory, shoulders not locked, jaw steady. The quiet in the apartment had a different shape now. There was a sleeping man in the living room and a boy down the hall who was not a boy anymore. I swung my feet to the floor and felt the old boards give a small sigh under my heels. By habit, I checked the locks and the stove even though I knew I had done it the night before. The sofa was a dark shape holding Daniel the way a guest bed holds a stranger, his arm draped heavy over his chest. The blanket had slid to his waist. I lifted it back to his shoulder and then went to the kitchen. Coffee first. It is the one rule I am willing to call a rule. I ground the beans and set the kettle and rinsed the press. The smell lifted into the room and took the edge off the leftover rain. I had eggs and a few strips of bacon and a half stack of tortillas. I have learned that warm food lowers the static in a room. I whisked the eggs with a little water and salt and slid them into a skillet. By the time the coffee had bloomed and settled, Evan stepped into the doorway in a t-shirt and flannel pants, sleepy and alert at the same time. He looked past me toward the living room. He said good morning very quietly. I said good morning and asked if he wanted scrambled or a breakfast taco. He said taco, then paused like he had given me too much to carry and added please. I warmed tortillas over the flame and handed him a plate. He took a bite and stood at the counter chewing with a seriousness that would have been funny on another day. He said, "Do you want me to eat in my room?" I said no. If he wakes up, he can be a person among people. Evan nodded and stretched his back and rolled his shoulders. Then he said, "I will help with dishes." I said, "You always do." He said, "Not always." I said, "Often enough." We were on the second cup when Daniel walked in with that careful, knowing look, the one that says he has rehearsed the first minute of the day. He said good morning and rubbed the back of his neck and reached for the mug I set near the coffee press. He took a sip and said, "This is better than I remember." He looked at the skillet and at the empty pan where the bacon had been. He said, "I can make pancakes if you have eggs." I told him we were good. He told me he could run to the market. I told him that after breakfast I needed to work and Evan needed to get to school. It was not school, not exactly, but a study block and a lab hour he liked to use. The point was the same. He lingered by the counter and said he had thought about everything last night and wanted to do this right. He said, I know I have no right to ask for anything, and I know I messed up, and I know I left you carrying the heavy end of everything. He added that he was trying to rebuild, and that the project in Portland looked promising. He said if he could get a few stable weeks, he could show me he was different. I watched the way his hands moved when he talked, open, then closed. He was measuring not only my mood but the surface area of my patience. I said, here are the rules. You can stay 48 hours. No keys, no guests, no mail, no talk of money. If you need a list of shelters, I can print one. If you need a list of short-term sublets, I can search later. He drew in a breath and let it out like a man sliding into a hot bath. He said that was more than fair and that he was grateful and that I would not regret it. He said a lot of thank yous that had the same size and weight. Evan finished his plate and rinsed it and set it in the rack. He said, I am going to shower. He left without meeting Daniel's eyes. When water ran behind the bathroom door, Daniel leaned his hips against the counter and looked at the fridge magnets like they were a bulletin board at church. He said I saw the photo of him with the soccer trophy. I said he stopped playing and moved into robotics. He said that figures he was always taking apart the remote and putting it back together. I did not remind him that he had been gone by the time the remote started staying in one piece. He said, can I do something for him for a start? I said that depends on the something. He took a breath like he was about to reach behind his back and pull out a rabbit. He said I got him a watch. I thought a boy about to become a man might like a good watch. He reached into his duffel and set a small box on the table. It was black with a silver logo. He slid the lid back and the cuff rose like a tiny stage. The face was polished, the bracelet heavy. It was beautiful and not subtle. He said it is not new, but it is quality. I kept my face steady. I said you can give it to him yourself. He smiled and then looked toward the hall. In the same moment, Evan stepped out with damp hair and a backpack slung over one shoulder. Daniel said I got you something. Evan stopped 3 steps into the room. He set down the backpack. He said you did not have to. Daniel said I know, but I wanted to. He held out the box. Evan studied the watch and then the man offering it. He said thank you. He tried it on and it hung loose and slid down over the knuckle of his thumb. He said the bracelet is big. Daniel said we can get that sized. There is that shop on Market Street by the bakery. Evan nodded and put the watch back into the box and closed the lid like he was returning a shell to the ocean. Daniel said, let me take you after school. Evan said I have lab and a shift at the campus bookstore, maybe later in the week. Daniel nodded without letting disappointment harden his face. He looked at me and said I can drop him at school. Evan answered before I could. He said I am taking the bus, and then he said thanks though. He lifted the backpack and looked at me. I said text me if you change plans. He said I will. He walked to the door and put on his jacket and looked back once. That was for me. Then he left. The apartment rearranged itself in the space he had occupied. Daniel cleared his throat and asked if I had time to talk after I finished working. I said I had clients until noon and then a late afternoon block and that I would call him when I had a gap. He said perfect and picked up the empty mug and rinsed it and wiped the counter like a man trying to demonstrate he had learned to inhabit a space without leaving a mark. When he stepped out for a walk, I pulled my phone and called Megan. She answered in the middle of a laugh and then heard my voice and became all calm, quick edges the way she gets when duty shoulders out everything else. I told her Daniel was here and that I had set rules. She said, good. I told her he had mentioned rebuilding credit and had offered a watch to Evan and had used the word project in Portland twice. She said that sounded like a man who needs a legal address and a signature. She said, do not co-sign anything, do not let him get mail, do not say yes to any document. She said the bank that held the old refinance still had my signature on file and that if anything pops up, she can request a verification letter. She asked if I felt safe. I said yes. She asked if Evan was steady. I said he was more steady than most adults. She said call if anything changes. I said I will. We are good at short sentences when the past reappears wearing its best manners. I worked through the morning while Daniel stayed strangely quiet gone, or moving softly, I could not tell. Noon, I heated soup and answered 2 client emails and sent a proposal to a small design company in Fremont. At 1, Evan texted that he had a gap and would run to the shop by the bakery to get the watch sized. I stared at the screen and typed sounds fine and then erased it, and typed be safe and erased that too, and finally wrote send me a photo if they can fix it while you wait. He sent a thumbs up. I set the phone down and then picked it up and then set it down again. An hour later, he called. The background noise told me he was on the sidewalk. He said the clerk at the jeweler looked up the serial and said it came through a liquidation auction tied to a company that shut down last fall. He said the clerk mentioned this brand sometimes gets bundled with estate lots and business lots, and that the numbers on the back suggest it had been an engraved corporate gift. He said there was a faint ghost of an engraving on the clasp, polished off, but still there if you tilted it toward the light. He said the watch is real, but it is a story. He said that without bitterness. I felt something in my chest settle and harden like cooling glass. I asked if it runs. He said it does, but it needs a new battery and one link removed. He said they would do it in 10 minutes. He said he would be home by 3 to finish his lab write-up. I told him I would be here. When we hung up, I stood still in the kitchen and let the truth roll through like a weather front. Daniel had given the appearance of generosity funded by the remains of his losses. That is not a crime. It is a pattern. Daniel came in around 2 with a pretzel and a cheerful report about a construction site near the stadiums where he had seen a crew pouring a foundation in the drizzle, as if that detail could make him a citizen of hard work by association. He asked if I needed anything from the store. I said no. He offered to pick up Evan from school. I said he took the bus. He said right. He sat at the table and watched me type and did not speak. The old version of me would have filled that quiet with something friendly. The current version let quiet do its job. Evan came home with the watch on his wrist. The fit looked good. He held it out for me to see. He said they adjusted it and replaced the battery. I said it looks nice. He said it is heavy. Daniel lit with a hopeful pride. He said looks good on you. Evan said thanks and walked to his room to swap his shoes, and then came back with his notebook and spread out his notes on the table. He explained a materials lab they were running about tensile strength and fracture points. Daniel tried to track the conversation and then let it go. He said I need to make a few calls. He moved to the far end of the room and spoke in a voice pitched low the way people do when they want you to hear the tone but not the content. Later, I started dinner and kept it simple. Roasted potatoes, broccoli with lemon chicken thighs, in a pan sauce. Daniel offered to help and I said he could set the table. He did careful and precise, folding the napkins into tidy squares. In another life, I would have read that as care. Now I read it as someone trying to earn points in a system I no longer administer. We ate without drama. Evan talked about a summer program he had been researching. Daniel nodded and asked what time frame it covered and what the schedule looked like. Evan answered, but his eyes tipped toward me to shape the conversation. I let them talk. After the plates went into the sink, Evan picked up the box the watch had come in and held it in his hand. He looked at Daniel and said the clerk said it came from a liquidation. Daniel opened his mouth and then closed it. Evan said it is fine. It works now. He set the box on the counter and looked at me. I understood what he was asking. It was not about the watch. It was about whether small truths would be allowed to gather without being dragged into a fight. I said I am going to take a quick walk around the block. I need air. Evan nodded. Daniel said I can go with you. I said I need to clear my head. He hesitated and then sat back down. Outside, the air felt like wet linen. Ballard smelled like yeast and rain and diesel. I took the long way around and checked the mail and thought about Megan's voice saying, "Do not sign anything," and thought about the watch face in Evan's palm, and the way Daniel's eyes had slid to the side when the origin of the gift was named. When I came back, the kitchen lights were on low, and the living room lamp was lit. Daniel had made himself small on the end of the sofa with his phone in his hand. Evan was at the table finishing a graph. He looked steadier than he had the night before. He turned the watch on his wrist so the face lay against his skin rather than the room. I have always loved that small habit of his. Turn the bright thing inward. Let it be for you, not for them. I washed my hands and dried them and said I am going to make a list for tomorrow. Evan said, "Do you want me to pick up anything after lab?" I said we need bananas and oats and dish soap. He wrote it on his phone. Daniel said I can do a grocery run in the morning. I said we are covered. He nodded like a man taking a correction. He said goodnight early as if retreat were the wisest move. He stretched out on the sofa and pulled the blanket up and turned on his side toward the back cushions. Evan stood and rinsed his glass and set it in the rack. He walked to the counter and placed the watch box neatly next to the fruit bowl. He touched the lid with 2 fingers as if marking the end of something. Then he looked at me and said quietly, "It does not matter if it is expensive if it does not tell the truth." I said, "Do you want to keep it?" He said, "I will wear it for now." He paused and gave me a small smile that had no triumph in it, only clarity. Then he said, "I am going to finish the write-up and call Jason about the lab." He went to his room. The apartment returned to its version of still. I wiped the counter and set the dish towel straight on the oven handle. The rain had eased to a suggestion. Upstairs, someone laughed and a chair scraped, and then quiet folded back over everything. I stood in the doorway to the living room and looked at the man asleep on my sofa and the boy writing at his desk, and let the 2 images sit side by side without trying to reconcile them. In the morning, there would be more talk and more rules, and probably another small performance. For tonight, the kitchen was clean, the list was written, and the watch ticked in a steady circle on my son's wrist. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 3, Dinner with the Truth. By the end of the week, the apartment had settled into a rhythm that was neither peace nor chaos, something in between, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm that is trying to make up its mind. Daniel had stayed longer than the 48 hours I allowed, finding ways to stretch time with Aaron's apologies and small talk that pretended to be progress. He was polite, useful even, but every sentence he spoke carried a hook. On Friday evening, he walked into the kitchen while I was finishing an invoice and said in that rehearsed, casual tone, "How about dinner tomorrow night, just the 3 of us? A family dinner, we could use that, don't you think?" I looked up at him and saw that he had already set the trap by calling it family. I could have said no, but Evan was in the next room, and part of me wanted him to see what closure looked like when you keep your dignity. So I said, "One dinner, Daniel, nothing more." He smiled with relief, too eager, and said, "I'll take care of everything, just let me cook, you'll see I've learned." Saturday evening came cold and gray with the kind of drizzle that turns every streetlight into a halo. Daniel showed up early from the store holding a paper bag with ingredients and a bottle of wine. He moved through the kitchen like he belonged there, slicing onions and seasoning chicken with exaggerated calm. Evan came out of his room, laptop tucked under his arm, wearing that quiet expression that hides more thought than it shows. Daniel greeted him warmly. "Hey, I'm making your favorite roasted chicken with lemon and garlic, remember that?" Evan looked at the cutting board and said, "You made that once, I think, when I was 8. Daniel's smile faltered, but held its shape. "Well, you'll remember it again tonight." I set the table while he cooked, the sound of the oven fan filling the air. The dining table looked smaller than usual, crowded by plates, and the forced effort of pretending this was normal. When everything was ready, Daniel lit a small candle and poured wine into my glass, water into Evan's. He started talking before the food cooled the conversation, wandering through safe topics. Work, weather, memories that had lost their edges. I listened without answering much. Evan pushed his food around, taking small bites, watching both of us the way a scientist observes a slow reaction. Then Daniel shifted tone, as if changing gears in a car he had driven too many times. "I've been thinking a lot about Evan's future," he said, setting down his fork. "He's bright. He should have every opportunity. I want to help with that. Maybe start a college fund, something to make up for lost time." Evan glanced at me, unsure where this was going. I stayed still. Daniel leaned forward, voice soft. "There's a small matter of paperwork. I spoke with a credit officer who said if I had a co-signer, someone with good standing, I could secure a low-interest loan and use it to set up an account in Evan's name. It's just a formality, really. I'd need your signature, Laura. Since the house is in your name now, they want to confirm stability of assets. Nothing complicated." He said it like it was nothing, like trust was a box I could reopen without cutting my hands. I set my napkin down and met his eyes. "You know that house is mine. It was refinanced after the divorce. You signed the release yourself." He smiled in that gentle way people do when they think charm will cover deceit. Right, I know. This is just temporary paperwork. It would help me qualify and in turn help Evan. I'm not asking for money, just a little faith." The word faith sat on the table like a cold coin. Evan stopped eating. "Wait," he said quietly. "You need Mom's house so I can go to college." Daniel lifted his hands. "No, it's not like that. It's a formality. I'm trying to do something right this time." Evan's voice was calm, almost too calm. "So you can't get the loan without her name?" Daniel took a slow breath. "Technically, no, but that's just how banks operate. They don't see potential the way we do. This is me fixing things. For both of you." Evan reached into his backpack that hung on the back of his chair. He unfolded a printed page and laid it next to the salt shaker. I saw the black headline first. Hale Construction Asset Seized. Fraud Judgment Finalized. There was a photo of Daniel outside a courthouse, hand up to block the camera. Evan said quietly, "Doing something right would start with telling the truth." The words hung there soft, but cutting through every bit of air in the room. Daniel stared at the page, then at Evan, and I watched his face collapse inward. He blinked, mouth tightening, then said through his teeth, "You know nothing about sacrifice." Evan didn't flinch. "I know when someone lies." The sound of the chair scraping back against the floor was louder than it needed to be. Daniel stood trembling between anger and shame. "You've been poisoned against me," he said, turning toward me now. "You raised him to hate his own father." I kept my voice level. "I raised him to see clearly." Daniel shoved the chair aside and grabbed his jacket. The candle flickered from the sudden movement. "I can't do this," he said, and stormed out the door, catching the draft and slamming so hard the wineglasses rattled. The silence after was almost kind. Evan stared at the half-eaten plate in front of him, his shoulders tense. He said quietly, "I didn't mean to make it worse." I reached for his hand. "You didn't. You just saved me from the same mistake twice." He nodded but didn't look at me. His eyes stayed fixed on the article. "He won't stop, will he?" "Maybe not yet," I said, "but we will." I cleared the plates while he folded the paper back into his bag, and we moved through the small tasks of cleaning like two people who knew better than to leave a mess for the morning. By the time the counters were wiped and the leftovers put away, the rain had started again. Evan stood by the sink, arms crossed, the watch still ticking on his wrist. "He said it was a formality," he murmured almost to himself. "That's how they always start." "Yes," I said. "Small words for big mistakes." He turned off the light and went to his room. The apartment shifted into the quiet again, but this time it wasn't uneasy. It was the sound of something settling into its truth. I poured the leftover wine into the sink and rinsed the glass until it ran clear. Later in bed, sleep stayed just out of reach. My mind replayed his words, his tone, that gentle manipulation that had always been his weapon of choice. I got up, pulled the storage box from under the closet shelf, and set it on the bed. Inside were the divorce papers, the refinance documents, the old bank statements that I had kept in careful order because numbers tell stories even when people lie. I turned through the pages until I reached the digital signatures from 12 years ago. There in faint gray, I saw something that stopped my breath. The initials beside a withdrawal slip from the joint account. The letters looked like mine, but weren't. The spacing was wrong, the loop in the L too tight. He had signed for me back then. I never saw it. The bank must have processed it before the separation. The pattern was not new, it had only evolved. I closed the folder and set it back in the box. Through the window, the city lights reflected against the wet glass, fractured and distant. Somewhere out there, Daniel was pacing in the rain, angry at being caught, already rewriting the story to make himself the victim. I had spent years carrying the weight of his version. I wasn't going to do that again. I turned off the light and lay back, eyes open to the dim ceiling. The apartment held steady rain brushing against the panes like a steady pulse. From the next room came the faint click of Evan's keyboard. I let that sound pull me toward sleep. There would be consequences in the morning, but for tonight, I had proof, and that was enough. If this story touched you, please subscribe, and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 4, The Paper and the Proof. 3 days passed in a work rhythm that felt almost like normal. I sent invoices, balanced ledgers, answered a client call about a payroll tax hiccup, and kept my phone on the counter like a weather radio. Evan went to class and lab and a bookstore shift. We moved through our routines as if the man who had slammed the door had already been absorbed by the rain. Then on the fourth morning, Daniel called from a number I did not recognize. I let it ring once more than I wanted to and answered. His voice came soft and urgent, sanded down at the edges. He said he had been set up. He said the article Evan printed was misleading. He said a former partner had filed things without his knowledge. He said there was a simple way to fix some of it if I would help sign a few documents to correct a clerical mix-up. He kept using the words simple and fix as if they were incense that could calm a room. I stood by the sink and watched water bead on the rim of a glass. I said to email me the forms and I would have my attorney review them. He tried to talk past that and I did not let him. I repeated it once more in the same tone I use when a client wants to categorize personal vacations as business travel. He said of course, and that he would send them right away. The email arrived before the call ended. A subject line with my name and the words updated application. A short message that said this will make things right. There was a PDF attached. I opened it and felt the old familiar tightness along my ribs. The loan application showed Daniel as primary and my name as co-signer. My address was printed under a line that said confirmed residence. The signature block already had my full name pre-filled in a light gray script that was not my hand but imitated it with the lazy confidence of someone who assumes no one is looking closely. I took 3 photos of my screen with my phone and then saved the file and forwarded the email to Megan. I added a single line, "Please review and call me." She wrote back almost immediately, "On it." 10 minutes later, she called and sounded like a metronome. She told me not to answer any more calls from Daniel about documents. She told me to forward every attachment and keep the originals. She told me she would check county records and the bank's signature archive and call a contact at the Financial Crimes Unit. I went to the table and opened the storage box again. I slid out the refinance packet and the notarized signature cards. I took photos of the parts that mattered and sent them to her. She texted a thumbs up and a time, 30 minutes. I made tea and did nothing with my hands while the kettle cooled. The apartment felt like a courthouse waiting room, quiet but not calm. Megan called back right on time. She had already pulled the county index and found a filing from 2 weeks ago with my name attached as an interested party on a preliminary lien notice. She said the scanned image showed a digital signature that did not match the bank's sample. She had also spoken to a clerk at the bank who confirmed that my current signature style on file had different pressure points. She said the timestamps on the application metadata suggested that a prior version had been created and uploaded from a device associated with Hale Construction's last known office. Her voice stayed dry as paper. She said this is forgery with intent to obtain credit. She said she had reached Officer James Rivera at Seattle's Financial Crimes Unit. She said Rivera would review and verify with the bank and the county portal and then set next steps. She asked if I felt safe. I said yes. She asked if I would be willing to meet Daniel to hand him a paper copy. I understood the ask before she explained it. Keep the meeting in public. Keep the conversation short. Give him enough rope to show intent while an officer stands by with a notice to appear. I said yes. I picked a cafe I liked 2 blocks from the apartment. It has glass walls and good coffee and a habit of playing music at a volume that lets you think. Megan said she would coordinate with Rivera and text me the time. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed. 5 in the afternoon, corner table near the window. Keep the exchange to the documents. Do not argue. She added one more line. Bring Evan if he wants to be there. Your call. I stared at that for a moment. Then I walked to Evan's room and knocked. He looked up from a book with an easy kind of focus. I told him there would be a meeting at the cafe and that the police would serve a notice. I said he did not have to come. Not. He thought for a breath and then nodded. He said I want to see this done the right way. He put on his jacket and slid his notebook into his bag. At 4:50, we walked through air that smelled like clean pavement. The cafe windows glowed against the gray. We took the corner table. I set the printed pages in a manila folder and laid it on the table with a pen on top. Evan ordered a hot chocolate. I ordered coffee. We sat with our backs to the wall where we could see the door and the street in a single glance. I felt solid and strangely light the way you feel when you are walking a straight white line with every point of balance under you. Daniel arrived at exactly 5. He wore a clean coat and carried a smile that wanted to be contrition. He waved through the glass and entered slowly as if to show he had nothing to hide. He saw Evan and hesitated half a beat, then sat. His eyes went to the folder. He folded his hands and leaned forward. He started with the story. He said the former partner had filed as a power of attorney and had used my name without his knowledge. He said this application was a way to reverse a prior error. He said he would never put me or Evan at risk. He said a lot of things that sounded like a record he had memorized. I kept my voice as level as the tabletop. I slid the folder toward him and opened it to the signature page. The light gray script of my name looked even more false on paper. I tapped the block and said the words without lifting my tone. "You signed my name again." He blinked once and then began to nod as if we were on the same side of a misunderstanding. He said he thought I would forgive him, that I knew he was desperate, that this would help fix everything for Evan. He said it softly, almost tenderly, like a man laying a blanket over a wound. Forgiveness is not a legal defense. The line came out clean. It landed. He looked from me to Evan, groping for a new angle. His face went slack for a moment, then tightened. The quiet in the cafe seemed to sharpen. Evan did not look away. Daniel glanced around as if the air had changed temperature. He pushed the paper back an inch. "Laura, come on. We can handle this between us." I did not reach for the page. I did not reach for anything. "Email me any future documents, and my attorney will handle them." He opened his mouth, shut it, and sat back. In the glass behind him, I saw two figures pause at the door. A man in a windbreaker with a badge on a chain and a uniformed officer whose face showed no opinion. They waited a beat, then entered in a quiet way that did not ripple the room. The manager glanced up and then back down. The windbreaker man approached our table and spoke in a voice pitched to this small corner of space. "Mr. Hale, Officer Rivera, I have a notice to appear regarding a forgery and attempted credit fraud investigation. Identification, please." Daniel went very still. Then he made the kind of half-smile men make when they think charm will soften a rule. He reached for his wallet and handed over his license. Rivera checked the name, noted the address, and set a clipboard on the table. The uniformed officer stood a step behind and to the left, watching the door and the room. Rivera slid the form and a pen toward Daniel. His tone stayed even. "This is a notice to appear at the date and time indicated. You are not under arrest at this moment. You are required to appear. You will receive a follow-up with the case number. You have the right to consult an attorney. Do you understand?" Daniel stared at the form. For a second, I thought he might knock it to the floor or try a speech about misunderstanding. He looked at me instead. There was something like accusation in his eyes and something like pleading. He turned to Evan as if a son might offer him a ladder out of a hole he dug. "I just wanted to help." Evan did not raise his voice. He did not look angry. He met his father's eyes and answered in a tone so steady it felt like a level set on a beam. "You helped prove who you really are." The people at the table behind us stopped talking at the word prove. A couple by the window pretended harder to read their screens. Daniel seemed to deflate and compress at once. He signed the notice with a jerky hand, then pushed the clipboard back toward Rivera. Rivera took it, checked the signature, and slipped it into a folder. "We will be in contact," he said, and gave Daniel a small paper with the case contact line printed in black. He nodded to me and to Evan and then turned to go. The uniformed officer followed. At the door, Rivera paused and looked back once, not at Daniel, but at me, a brief professional acknowledgement. Then they were gone. Daniel sat motionless for a few seconds, then scraped his chair back slower than the night of the dinner, heavier somehow. He picked up his coat and stood. He tried one last angle. "We are still a family, Laura. You can fix this if you want to." I placed my hand flat on the folder and kept my eyes on his. "We fixed it." He swallowed. He looked at Evan, but there was nothing left to reach for. He put on his coat and walked out without speaking another word. Evan exhaled in a way that made me realize he had been holding the same breath I had. He looked at me and nodded. Then he looked down at his cup and said in a quiet voice that made the barista look up and smile without knowing why, "Hot chocolate was good." We sat for a minute and then stood. Outside, the light had shifted to that late afternoon silver that Seattle pulls across its shoulders like a shawl. We walked to the curb and watched as a dark sedan rolled away from the block. A figure slumped in the back seat, not police transport, just a rideshare. Rivera had not needed cuffs. Paper had done the work. Evan touched my elbow. I felt the steadiness in his hand. We crossed the street and headed home with the kind of quiet that feels earned. The cafe's windows reflected us as we passed. A woman with her chin up, a young man with his eyes clear. We did not speak until the corner. He said he would finish his lab right up after dinner. I said I would go through the rest of the files and send anything relevant to Megan. He said he could scan if I needed. I said I would like that. The rhythm of our voices felt like the old days when we built a life from lists and repeats and the next right move. Back at the apartment, I set the folder on the kitchen table and texted Megan. Served. She replied in seconds. Good. Send scans. I made tea while Evan set up the scanner app on his phone and held the pages flat with steady fingers. The light on the stove gave the room a simple honesty. He sent the files, and we watched the progress bar move like a thin blue horizon. When the last page went through, he smiled at me and put his phone down. We ate something simple, leftover chicken sliced into a quick salad. Bread warmed in the oven. Neither of us had an appetite for more. I washed dishes while he wiped the table and stacked the mail. The normal tasks felt like prayer, practical and true. Afterward, he went to his room, and the soft click of keys started again, a familiar metronome. I stood by the window and looked at the street. The rain had started up fine and clean. A car moved slowly past tires, hissing. I could not see Daniel. I did not want to. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel pity. What I felt was a loosening across my chest, a quiet release that had nothing to do with winning and everything to do with not carrying the weight of his stories anymore. I turned off the kitchen light and left the small lamp in the living room on. The apartment looked like itself. The sofa was just a sofa. The table was just a table. In the other room, my son worked on a graph. Paper lay in a neat stack on the counter, signed by the right hands moving forward through the right channels. I breathed and let that be the end of the day. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. What We Keep. 6 months later, the city had turned a softer shade of green. Spring light came early and lingered longer, stretching across the windows of my small office on Stoneway. The name on the glass read, Merit Accounting Services, printed in navy blue letters that caught the afternoon sun. The place was modest 2 rooms and a kitchenette, but it was mine. The hum of the printer, the quiet click of my calculator, and the faint scent of lemon cleaner were the only sounds most days. Steady clients, predictable work, calm hours. The kind of peace that doesn't announce itself, it just settles in and stays. On my desk sat the same silver watch that once ticked too loud on my son's wrist. Evan had left it for me after he noticed I wasn't wearing anything on my own. It had been repaired by the same jeweler who discovered its past. The new battery kept perfect time, and the faint engraving on the clasp was gone completely. I liked that. Time moving forward again. A knock came at the door mid-morning. I looked up and saw a woman framed in sunlight, her gray hair pulled back neatly, her coat folded over her arm. It took me a moment to place her. Barbara Hale, Daniel's mother. She looked smaller than I remembered, her eyes tired but steady. She said my name softly and stepped inside. I hope I'm not intruding. I stood and gestured toward the chair opposite mine. Not at all, please sit. She sat carefully, as if afraid of breaking something invisible between us. In her hands, she held a folded newspaper. She placed it on my desk and smoothed the edges. He pleaded guilty, she said quietly. Probation and restitution. No jail time, but he has to pay back what he took. I nodded, keeping my voice even. That's good. It's a start. She looked at me with eyes that had spent years watching a son make the wrong kind of decisions. He told his lawyer something, she said. He said you did what he couldn't. You took responsibility. He wanted me to tell you that. For a moment, I wasn't sure what to do with that sentence. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was something. I poured tea into 2 mugs and set one in front of her. Thank you for telling me, I said. I hope he finds a way to live better. She smiled faintly. He's working at a lumber yard outside Tacoma. It's honest work. Maybe that's enough for now. We drank our tea in silence, the kind that isn't uncomfortable, just full of things better left unsaid. When she stood to leave, she looked around the office, her gaze softening. You made a good life, she said. I made a life, I replied. The good part is still unfolding. She gave a small nod, tucked her coat under her arm, and left with the quiet dignity of someone who had finally stopped defending the indefensible. Later that afternoon, I walked to Green Lake to meet Evan. He had finished his last class for the week. and wanted to go over a project proposal for the university's summer STEM program. He had earned an early scholarship, and the acceptance letter still sat on our fridge like proof of what perseverance looks like. He was already there, sitting on the edge of the dock, sneakers untied, notebook open beside him. The water shimmered under a sky brushed with white clouds. When he saw me, he smiled and patted the spot next to him. I sat down and took in the view. Ducks drifted near the reeds. A jogger passed by with headphones in. Somewhere behind us, kids laughed at something in the playground. For a while, we didn't speak. He closed his notebook and said Grandma Barbara stopped by the apartment earlier. She told me about the sentencing. I nodded. She came to see me too. Evan looked at the lake, his reflection moving slightly with the ripples. Do you hate him, Mom? The question didn't surprise me, but the steadiness in his voice did. I thought about it before answering. No, I said finally. Hate keeps you tied to them. I'm free because I stopped needing him to change. He was quiet for a moment. I think I understand that now. You will, I said, in your own way. He smiled, small and genuine, then leaned back on his hands, face turned toward the light. He looked older than 17 in that moment, older and certain in a way I hadn't seen before. We stayed there until the sun dipped lower, the water turning gold. Then my phone buzzed. A new email. I checked the screen and saw Megan's name. The message was short. Because of your evidence, the district attorney reopened 2 more forgery cases tied to Daniel's filings. You didn't just protect yourself. You protected others. I read it twice and then pressed delete. Some victories don't need to be framed. When I looked up, Evan was watching me. Good news, he asked. Just something finished, I said. Something put away. We started walking back toward the parking lot. The air was soft, scented with rain and lilac from the gardens nearby. The trees along the trail leaned gently toward the water, and the light bounced off the surface like it wanted to follow us home. He slipped his hands into his jacket pockets and said, You know, sometimes I think everything that happened made us stronger. It did, I said. But strength isn't the point. Peace is. He nodded and smiled again, a little wider this time. Then I think we're finally there. When we reached the car, I paused and looked back at the lake. The reflections were steady now. No wind, no waves, just a calm surface holding everything it had seen. In that stillness, I felt the kind of closure that doesn't need words. I thought about the years of noise, the anger, the quiet work it takes to rebuild your own story. I thought about how far we had come from the woman who once checked locks twice each night to the one who now trusted silence to keep her safe. At home later, I placed the watch on the windowsill. The hands glowed faintly in the dark. Time had a way of forgiving what people couldn't. Before turning off the light, I looked at Evan's door, slightly ajar, music drifting out in low volume, a melody both familiar and new. I smiled and let the sound carry through the hall. My voice came quietly, not for him, but for anyone who might ever find themselves standing where I once stood. He came back begging for redemption. But I had already raised it. If you've ever been asked to forgive someone who once walked away, remember forgiveness is a gift, not a return. The lamp's reflection spread across the glass, merging with the night outside. The city lights blinked in rhythm with the watch's steady tick. And in that small apartment by the lake, everything finally aligned, time, truth, and peace moving forward together.